Hello. So when it comes to search strategy, I think this is becoming much more important now for AI search than it ever has been for traditional search, where we might have focused on a particular set of keywords like residential heat network service provider. But here, what we're trying to do is discover the objectives, concerns, pain points, and so on for a particular group of people who may need that solution. And AI is useful to break that down. You might have got market research that you've already done around your customer base, and these two things combined, I think, make a really good foundation for planning out a strategy of how you're going to accommodate this. Because in traditional search, you'll be focused on certain keywords. And now I think you really need to be focused on providing solutions to certain needs, whether that's their objectives, it's addressing their concerns, and it's discussing some of their pain points. So this is just an example for a B2B business, but you can just switch out this, keep a lot of it the same, but instead of housing associations, it might be gym users, for example, and what their objectives are if you're selling something like protein powder and so on. So a really good starting position to take from this, and then we'll look more into how AI actually responds for more user-based search in the next part. So the purpose of this search that we've got here is twofold. I think first of all, it's about the understanding of how AI is actually treating a search that can really change the narrative about your strategy and help other people to understand as well that this is a significant change from a traditional search engine response to a query. And the second part is understanding, really what AI is digging into so that we can use that in our strategy and understand, the tick boxes that we now need to go through for an entirely sort of different search operation. So we've got what would be a standard search in first appear, best place to buy a graphics card in the UK. And then I've added some instructions at the end of it. So just replace this opening search with something that's more relevant to your industry. I would go for something that is really high intent. So somebody who's looking for a service, somebody who's looking to make a purchase, because that's where you really need to start with AI. Nail those things first before you move into thought leadership and so on. And it's really interesting to see how AI breaks this down. We can see the thinking behind this and how it explores retail options, identifying key players. But what I like in here is it talks about things like user sentiment in here, hesitation for high value purchases. There's all this that it's doing in the background that a traditional search would never ever have done. As try as it might, it just doesn't do such a good job as a large language model. Potential for stock and pricing as significant factors. And then if we come down here, it will, it's giving us pros, excellent stock reliability, cons, delivery charges. This is just for scan computers, and goes on and does the same for various other retailers. So in a normal Google search, this, all of this information becomes a bunch of links, and it's nowhere near doing as deep a job as we're getting out of here. Gives us a nice little table as well. And then here we've got the query fan out searches. So this is another area where we've made that one initial search, but it has gone off on its own back and made these additional searches. And that is a fundamental way in which search has changed. You put in your seed question, and then it goes off and finds the cheapest place. We didn't ask it to do that, or the most reliable place. And it does comparisons as well. So, this is really interesting stuff that can help you build not really you might have a keyword list. This sort of replaces that, but it needs to be used in a different way as well. It's not exactly the same. But to understand all these additional searches that are being made, I think is really important. And then looking at as well where it actually went out and found this information. So it breaks out here things like Reddit, that is being used, and you might find certain sites that turn up an awful lot for your sector, and these would be sites that I would then start to target with any kind of PR and outreach, because I know that AI are looking in these places, these various tech forums and the like, that may be highly influential on an AI search result, much less so on a standard traditional top 10 links kind of result. So I find this really useful. You ideally want to be able to do this at scale. And this is, that is possible, but it's quite difficult to do. You need different tools set up to do it. But as a starting place, you can drop a few queries into here and get, more insight into what is actually going on underneath the hood of some of these AI responses. So this is Google Notebook, and I find it really useful for a couple of reasons. What it excels at is you add sources of content to it, and then any questions that you ask will only really interrogate the sources that you have added. So it's not drawing from websites and so on that you haven't added to it. So it's not hallucinating a reply or kind of contaminating its response with something that you haven't already fed it. And what I tend to do with this, and there are other tools which can do this on a greater scale, but each of these text documents here are a copy and paste from a Google Gemini response. So I've made a lot of questions through Google Gemini, I've copied their responses, and I've just added them as individual sources into here. Now you can add up to 300 sources. I believe it's got vast potential. You can add lots and lots of information to it, and then we can interrogate it. So what I tend to do is try and find themes out of the responses, and the more responses you've got, obviously the more accurate your themes are going to be. So you can ask it just some simple questions. What are the top 10 considerations highlighted within these sources? For example, price. And it will then go and start listing out things that it finds, on kind of common themes between all of those replies. So we can get a breakdown of, which are the most important ones. So I've asked it here to give me percentages. So we can see here application and internal layout is contained in 100% of the sources. So that's 12 out of 12. Whereas we come down here, legal requirements is mentioned 5 times in 5 of those sources out of the 12, and you can build up a picture of what's most important to go after, but what those smaller considerations might be. I mean, 40% is still quite high, and you probably want to cover all of those things, but this will give you an idea of where to begin and why you're doing it. It gives you some explanation and citations, and this is quite a chunky piece of work to get your teeth into. There's a lot of information in there, but the analysis of those AI responses and pulling out those themes and then going back to the beginning and see how they fit in with your initial sort of customer research. This will then give you a really clear path about what you need to be doing on maybe even each of your pages. If it's a product page, addressing each of these concerns in turn, whether that's through an FAQ or just through the copy itself. But it gives you something that you essentially, I think, in the AI space that you need to start considering, whereas in the standard search space, that these things could easily get overlooked by the likes of Google or Bing. It's not the case with an AI. You need to address, a good portion of these themes, and which will clearly, change by sector. And you might think, well, for my sector, there's only maybe 1 or 2 things people are interested in. I imagine any sector will have, 5, 6, 10 plus. So find out what they are and then start addressing them on your website.